Hi, thanks for joining me. My name is Jiso and this is Master Dōgen's Shōbōgenzō. We're reading Dene, which is chapter 13, the transmission of the robe. Done a couple of readings now. I'm on paragraph 153. In sum, remember that the Kesa is the body of the Buddha and the mind of the Buddha. Further, it is called the clothing of liberation, called the robe of a field of happiness, called the robe of endurance, called the robe without form, called the robe of compassion, called the robe of the Tathagata, and called the robe of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. We must receive and retain it as such. In the great kingdom of Sung today, people who call themselves students of the precepts because they are drunk on the wine of the Shravaka are neither ashamed, regretful, nor aware that they have received the transmission of a lineage which is alien to their own clan. Having changed the Kesa that has been transmitted from the western heavens and handed down through the ages from Han to Tang China, they follow small thoughts. It is due to the small view that they are like that, and they should be ashamed of their small view. Given that they now wear a robe based on their own small thinking, they probably lack many other of the Buddhist dignified forms. Such things happen because their learning of and reception of the transmission of the Buddhist forms are incomplete. The fact is evident that the body and mind of the Tathagata has been authentically transmitted only in the lineage of the patriarchs, and it has not spread into the customs of those other lineages. If they knew only one Buddhist form in 10,000, they would never destroy the Buddha's robe. Not having clarified even the meaning of sentences, they have never been able to hear the fundamental. There again, to decide that coarse cotton is the only material for the robe runs deeply counter to the Buddha Dharma. Above all, it ruins the Buddha robe. Disciples of the Buddha should not wear a robe made according to this rule. Why? Because to uphold a view about cloth ruins the Kesa. It is pitiful that the views of the Shravaka of the small vehicle are so tortuous. After their views about cloth have been demolished, the Buddha's robe will be realized. What I am saying about the use of silk and cotton is not the teaching of one Buddha or two Buddhas. It is the great Dharma of all the Buddhas to see rags as the best and purest material for the robe. When, for the present, we list the 10 sorts of rags among those rags, they include silk, cotton, and other kinds of cloth too. Must we not take rags of silk? If we are like that, we go against the Buddha's truth. If we hated silk, we would also have to hate cotton. Where is the reason to hate silk or cotton? To hate silk thread because it is produced by killing is very laughable. Is cotton not the habitat of living things? Sentiment about sentience and insentience is not liberated from the sentiment of the common and the sentimental. How could it know the Buddha's Kesa? There is further speaking of nonsense by those who bring forth arguments about transformed thread. This is also laughable. Which material is not a transformation? Those people believe the ears which hear of transformation, but they doubt the eyes which see transformation itself. They seem to have no ears in their eyes and no eyes in their ears. Where are their ears and eyes at the moment of the present? Now remember, while we are collecting rags, there may be cotton that looks like silk, and there may be silk that looks like cotton. When we use it, we should not call it silk and we should not call it cotton. We should just call it rags. Because it is rags. It is as rags beyond silk and beyond cotton. Even if there are human beings or gods who have survived as rags, we should not call them sentient, but they may be rags. even if they are pine trees or chrysanthemums which have become rags. We should not call them insentient, but they may be rags. When we recognize the truth that rags are neither silk nor cotton, and that they are beyond pearls and jewels, rags are realized and we meet rags for the first time. Before views about silk and cotton have withered and fallen, we have never seen rags, even in a dream. If we retain views about the cloth, even if we have spent a lifetime receiving and retaining coarse cotton cloth as a kesa, that is not the authentic transmission of the Buddha's robe. At the same time, the various kinds of kesa include cotton kesa, silk kesa, and leather kesa. All of these have been worn by Buddhas. They have the Buddhist merits of the Buddhist robe, and they possess the fundamental principle that has been authentically transmitted without interruption. But people who are not liberated from common sentiment make light of the Buddha Dharma, not believing the Buddha's words. They aim blindly to follow the sentiment of the common man. They must be called non-Buddhists who have attached themselves to the Buddha Dharma. They are people who destroy the right Dharma. Some claim to have changed the Buddha robe in accordance with the teaching of celestial beings. In that case, they must aspire to celestial Buddhahood. Or have they become descendants of gods? The Buddha's disciples expound the Buddha Dharma for celestial beings. They should not ask celestial beings about the truth. It is pitiful that those who lack the authentic transmission of the Buddha Dharma are like this. The view of the celestial multitudes and the view of the Buddha's disciples are very different in greatness, but gods come down to seek instruction in the Dharma from the Buddha's disciples. The reason is that the Buddhist view and the celestial view are very different. Discard and do not learn the small views of Shravakas, of precepts, sects. Remember that they are the small vehicle. The Buddha says, one can repent for killing one's father or killing one's mother, but one cannot repent for insulting the Dharma. In general, the way of small views and fox-like suspicion is not the original intention of the Buddha. The great truth of the Buddha Dharma is beyond the small vehicle. No one outside of the patriarch state of truth, which is transmitted with the Dharma treasury, has known of the authentic transmission of the great precepts of the Buddhas. Long ago, the story goes, in the middle of the night on Obai, the Buddha's robe and Dharma are transmitted authentically onto the head of the sixth patriarch. This is truly the authentic tradition for transmission of the Dharma and transmission of the robe. It is possible because the fifth patriarch knows a person. Fellows of the fourth effect and the three clever stages, as well as the likes of bodhisattvas in the 10 sacred stages, and the likes of commentary teachers and sutra teachers of philosophical schools, would give the robe and Dharma to Jinshu. They would not transmit them authentically to the sixth patriarch. Nevertheless, when Buddhist patriarchs select Buddhist patriarchs, they transcend the path of common sentiment, and so the sixth patriarch has already become the sixth patriarch. Remember, the truth of knowing a person and of knowing oneself, which the Buddhist patriarchs transmit from rightful successor to rightful successor, is not easily supposed. Later, a monk asks the sixth patriarch, "Shall we see the robe you received in the middle of the night on Obai as cotton, or should we see it as silk? Or should we see it as raw silk? In short, as what material should we see it?" The sixth patriarch says, "It is not cotton, it is not silk, and it is not raw silk." The words of the founding patriarch of Sokai are like this. Remember, the Buddha robe is not silk, not cotton, and not cotton crepe. Those who, on the contrary, heedlessly recognize the robe as silk, as cotton, or as cotton crepe, are the sort who insult the Buddha Dharma. How could they know the Buddha's kesa? Furthermore, there are episodes of the precepts being taken with the Buddhas. Welcome. That the caesas granted by these monks is utterly beyond discussion of silk and cotton is the Buddha's instruction in the Buddha's truth. In another case, the robe of Shanavasa when he was a layman is a secular garment, but when he leaves family life, it becomes a caesa. We should quietly consider this fact. We should not brush it aside as if we do not see it or hear it. Moreover, there is a fundamental principle which has been authentically transmitted from Buddha to Buddha and from patriarch to patriarch, and which the sort who count words in sentences cannot sense or fathom. Truly, how could the 1,000 changes and the myriad transformations of the Buddha's truth belong in the limited area of ordinary folk? The real state of samadhi exists, and real practices of dharani exist, but those who count grains of sand can never find these valuable pearls inside their clothes. We should esteem, as the right standard of the caesa of all Buddhas, the material, colour, and measurements of the present caesa which has been received in the authentic transmission from Buddhist patriarchs. The precedents for it in the Western heavens and in the Eastern lands, going back to ancient times and arriving at the present, are of long standing, and people who have distinguished the right precedents from the wrong have already transcended the state of enlightenment. Even though outside of the Buddhism of the patriarchs there are those who claim to have the caesa, no original patriarch has ever affirmed their robes as the twigs and leaves of the original caesa. How could their robes germinate the seeds of good roots? How much less could they bear real fruit? We now not only are seeing and hearing Buddha Dharma that we may have not met in vast kalpas, we also have been able to see and to hear the Buddha's robe, to learn about the Buddha's robe, and to receive and retain the Buddha's robe. This just exactly means that we are meeting the Buddha, we are hearing the voice of the Buddha, we are radiating the brightness of the Buddha, we are receiving and using the state received and used by the Buddha. We are receiving the one-to-one transmission of the mind of the Buddha, and we are getting the Buddha's marrow. For material to make the caesa, we invariably use that which is pure. Pure describes material offered by a donor of pure faith, or bought at a market, or sent by celestial beings, or donated by dragons, or donated by demons, or donated by kings and ministers, or even pure leather. We may use all such material. At the same time, we esteem the 10 sorts of rags as pure. The 10 sorts of rags are namely 1. Rags chewed by an ox, 2. Rags gnawed by rats, 3. Rags scorched by fire, 4. Rags soiled by menstruation, 5. Rags soiled by childbirth, 6. Rags offered at a shrine, 7. Rags left at a graveyard, 8. Rags offered in petitional prayer, 9. Rags discarded by a king's officers, 10. Rags brought back from a funeral. We esteem these 10 sorts as especially pure material. In secular society, they throw them away, but in Buddhism, we use them. From those customs, we can know the difference between the secular world and Buddhism. So when we want pure material, we should look for these 10 sorts. Finding them, we can know what is pure, and we can intuit and affirm what is not pure. We can know mind, and we can intuit and affirm body. When we obtain these 10 sorts, whether they are silk or whether they are cotton, we should consider their purity and impurity. If we understand that the reason we use those rags is to idly make ourselves shabby with shabby robes, that might be extremely stupid. Rags have always been used in Buddhism for their splendour and beauty. In Buddhism, what makes our attire shabby is clothes which have come from impurity, clothes of brocade, embroidered silk, silk twill and sheer silk, clothes of gold, silver, precious gems, and so on. This is the meaning of shabbiness. In general, whether in Buddhism of this land or of other worlds, when we use pure and beautiful cloth, it should be of these 10 sorts. Not only has it transcended the limitations of purity and impurity, it also is beyond the limited sphere of the superfluous and the absence of the superfluous. Do not discuss it as Do not discuss it as matter or mind. It is not connected with gain and loss. The fact is only that those who receive and retain the authentic transmission are Buddhist patriarchs. For when we are in the state of a Buddhist patriarch, we receive the authentic transmission. To receive and to retain this transmission as a Buddhist patriarch does not depend on manifestation or non-manifestation of the body, and does not depend on upholding or non-upholding of the mind, but the authentic transmission goes on being received. Absolutely, we should regret that in this country, Japan, monks and nuns of recent ages have for a long time gone without wearing the kesa, and we should be glad that we can receive and retain the kesa now. Even laymen and women who receive and keep the Buddhist precepts should wear the 5-stripe, 7-stripe and 9-stripe kesa. How then could people who have left family life fail to wear the kesa? It is said that everyone, from King Brahma and the gods of the 6 heavens down to secular men, secular women, and male and female slaves, should receive the Buddhist precepts and wear the kesa. How could bhikshus and bhikshunis fail to wear it? It is said that even animals should receive the Buddhist precepts and wear the kesa. How could disciples of the Buddha fail to wear the Buddha's robe? So those who want to become disciples of the Buddha, regardless of whether they are gods above, human beings, kings of nations, or government officials, and irrespective of whether they are lay people, monks, slaves, or animals, should receive and keep the Buddhist precepts and should receive the authentic transmission of the kesa. This is just the direct way to enter authentically into the state of Buddha. When washing the kesa, you should mix miscellaneous powdered incense into the water. After drying the kesa in the sun, fold it and put it in a high place. Serve offerings to it of incense and flowers and make 3 prostrations. Then, kneeling up, humbly receive it upon the head and with the hands joined, render devotion by reciting the following verse. How great is the clothing of liberation, formless field of happiness robe, devoutly wearing the Tathagata's teaching, widely I will save living beings. After reciting this verse 3 times, stand up on the ground and wear the kesa devoutly. During my stay in Sung, China, making effort on the long platform, I saw that my neighbour every morning at the time of releasing the stillness would lift up his kesa and place it on his head. Then, holding his hands together in veneration, he would silently recite the verse. At that time, there arose in me a feeling I had never before experienced. My body was overfilled with joy, and tears of gratitude secretly fell and moistened the lapels of my gown. The reason was that when I had read the Agama Sutras previously, I had noticed sentences about humbly receiving the kesa upon the head, but I had not clarified the standards for this behaviour and had not understood it clearly. Seeing it done now before my very eyes, I was overjoyed. I thought to myself, it is a pity that when I was in my homeland there was no master to teach me this, and no good friend to tell me of it. How could I not regret, how could I not deplore passing so much time in vain? Seeing it and hearing it now, I can rejoice in past good conduct. If I had been idly rubbing shoulders in the temples of my home country, how could I have sat shoulder to shoulder with this treasure of a monk who is actually wearing the Buddha's robe? Sadness and joy were not one-sided. Tears of gratitude fell in thousands and tens of thousands. Then I secretly vowed, one way or another, unworthy though I am, I will receive the authentic transmission of the right traditions of the Buddha Dharma, and, out of compassion for living beings in my homeland, I will cause them to see and to hear the robe and the Dharma which have been authentically transmitted from Buddha to Buddha. The vow made at that time has now not been in vain. The bodhisattvas in families and out of families who have received and retained the Kesa are many. This is a matter in which to rejoice. People who have received and retained the Kesa should humbly receive it upon their head every day and night. The merit of this may be especially excellent and supremely excellent. The seeing and hearing of a phrase or a verse may be as in the story of On Trees and on Rocks, but the merit of the authentic transmission of the Kesa is hardly encountered through the 10 directions. In the 10th lunar month, in the winter of the 17th year of Keijo in Great Sung, China, 2 Korean monks came to the city of Kaigenfu. One was called Chigen, the other Kaiun. Both of them were always discussing the meaning of Buddhist sutras, and they were also men of letters. But they had no Kesa and no Patra. They were like secular people. It is pitiful that though they had the external form of bhiksus, they did not have the Dharma of bhiksus. This may have been because they were from a minor nation in a remote land. When people from our country who have the external form of bhiksus travel abroad, they are likely to be the same as those 2 monks. Shakyamuni Buddha himself received the Kesa upon his head for 12 years, never setting it aside. As already his distant descendants, we should emulate this. To turn the forehead away from prostrations idly done for fame and gain to gods, to spirits, to kings, and to retainers, and to turn it now towards the humble reception upon the head of the Buddha's robe is a joyful and great happy event. Shōbōgenzō Den-e, the first day of winter in the first year of Ninji, written at Kannon-dori Kosho Horinji Temple, a Shramana who entered Sung, China and received the transmission of Dharma, Dōgen. Thanks for listening.